It looks like things have taken a dramatic turn behind the scenes at Buckingham Palace. King Charles revealed some shocking details about Diana's funeral. The whole world witnessed Princess Diana charm millions with her beauty, kindness, and unwavering commitment to helping others. When she died in 1997, it sent shockwaves around the world, causing more sadness than ever before. Despite all the sadness and tributes, there's still one question that remains unanswered. Why was her coffin closed at her funeral? It almost feels like it was just yesterday. I almost wish we could go back in time and see if Diana and Charles ever had a chance to get together. Before we delve into the long-kept secret about her coffin, let's take a moment to remember how Diana won the hearts of so many people. People all over the world were fascinated by the story of Princess Diana and Prince Charles. It was a tale of royal beauty and deeply personal moments. It all started when two very different people met and married, ultimately changing the royal family forever. Although their relationship became difficult over time, it was always happy, especially in the beginning. Diana Frances Spencer was born on July 1, 1961, into a wealthy family with strong ties to the British upper class. There were 8 Spencer children in her family. Her mother, Frances Ruth Burke Roch, was the daughter of the 4th Baron Fermoy. Diana's early life had both easy and hard moments. The Spencer family was highly regarded, but they also had their share of problems. Diana's parents divorced when she was only 7 years old. It was a stressful event that changed her early life. Diana was close to both of her parents, but after they split in 1969, she was raised mostly by her father and kept in touch with her mother less frequently. Despite the mental challenges she faced, Diana's early life was filled with opportunities. Her mother's connections to the royal family meant that the Spencers had strong ties to them. Diana spent much of her time at Althorpe House in Northampton, the Spencer family home. It was there that Diana developed an interest in the arts and charity work. While she was at Althorpe, Diana visited many different places, including the well-known West Heath Girls' School, where her swimming and dancing skills helped her stand out. However, Diana was more than just a pretty face. She caught the world's attention in many other ways. Diana stood out from other women in her situation because she was naturally warm and kind. Many people viewed her as a princess due to her kind heart and her ability to relate to those who were less wealthy. Prince Charles was born on November 14, 1948, as the oldest son of Queen Elizabeth Roman II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. From the moment he was born, he was in the news because he was the heir to the British throne. He grew up in a very different environment than Diana did, one that was full of duty and hope. Charles spent much of his time away from his family, as he attended boarding schools where he was taught how to play the part he would later take on. His education was one of the toughest any royal had ever experienced. He had private tutors and attended places like Hill House Preparatory School and Gordonstoun in Scotland, which his father had also attended. Gordonstoun was a particularly challenging place for Charles, as it was strict and far from the comforts of royal life. Despite the challenges, Charles developed an interest in subjects such as history, farming, and especially the environment. However, the loneliness he often felt during this time had a lasting impact on him. Formal ties bound Charles to his family, but his mother was often absent due to her royal duties. This absence gave Charles a strong sense of responsibility as a child, but also fostered a desire to connect with others on a deeper level, a trait that would influence his relationships later on. When Charles was young, he attended the University of Cambridge, where he studied history and archaeology. Stepping away from the pressures of royal life and seeing the world from a different perspective was a major turning point for him. During these years, he became increasingly interested in cultural and social issues, some of which he would later support as prince. When it comes to getting married, for Charles it was never just about love. It was also about choosing someone who could one day become queen. You need to pick people very carefully. When Diana and Charles met for the first time in 1977, their story really began to take shape. From what everyone says, Diana and Charles' first meeting wasn't very exciting. Diana was a nursery school teacher at the time, and she had no idea that the man she was meeting would eventually become the King of England. Charles had just met a young woman by chance, and she seemed different from other women he had met, which made her interesting in a way he hadn't expected. Despite being 13 years apart in age, they quickly found things they had in common. People were drawn to Diana because she was friendly and easy to talk to, and Charles fell in love with her. She too fell in love with him and was impressed by his cleverness and sense of duty. They started seeing each other more frequently, and their friendship began to grow. By 1981, the relationship between Diana and Charles had reached a serious level. Both the pair and their relationship garnered a great deal of attention from the media due to the fact that they were frequently seen together. Charles made his proposal to Diana on February 6, 1981, while they were on vacation in the Caribbean. This came after they had been dating for a few years, and due to their seemingly ideal pairing a prince and a stunning young woman from an aristocratic family, the proposal was hailed across the world. In the years that followed their wedding, Diana and Charles were fortunate enough to have two healthy children. On June 21, 1982, at St. Mary's Hospital in London, the couple had their first child, a son named Prince William. As William was second in line to the throne, his birth became a momentous occasion. In contrast to the traditional custom of the royal family, which was to deliver infants at home, Diana made the courageous choice to give birth in a hospital. This decision marked a shift toward making the royal family appear more approachable to the general public and was seen as a pioneering move. 2 years later, on September 15, 1984, they welcomed their second son, Prince Harry. With the arrival of Harry, the family was complete, and Diana and Charles were now the joyful parents of two brothers who were in good health. Through their roles as parents, Diana and Charles were both deeply involved in the lives of their children, but in very different ways. Diana was well known for her hands-on approach, as she frequently took her sons on vacations and included them in activities that were part of their daily routine. Despite the fact that they were royals, she exerted a great deal of effort to make sure that they had a childhood that was as typical as possible. On the other hand, Charles had a more conventional approach to the role of parent because he was destined to become king in the future. His position in the lives of his children was always going to be more formal. His responsibilities as Prince of Wales meant that he had less time to spend with his sons, but it was abundantly evident that he had a profound affection for them and felt tremendous satisfaction in their accomplishments. In spite of being married to Diana, Charles' relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles has been one of the aspects of his life that has received the most attention. In the early 1970s, Camilla was introduced to Charles for the very first time. Before they became engaged, she came from a British family that was well established and had connections to the palace. Born into this family, it didn't take long for them to develop a strong bond with one another. Later on, it was disclosed that Charles had been subjected to significant pressure from his family, particularly from his mother, Queen Elizabeth Roman II, to marry someone who was a better fit in terms of social standing and public impression. Hence, he chose Diana as his spouse. Ultimately, Camilla's relationship with Charles became even more complicated as a result of her marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles, a man who hailed from a military family that was well regarded. This marriage took place in 1973. Their emotional connection remained strong throughout the years, despite the fact that Charles and Camilla were married to separate people. Despite this, they continued to retain their close bond with one another. It is widely acknowledged that the relationship that existed between Charles and Diana was a crucial factor in the collapse of their marriage. In spite of the fact that Charles did feel horrible about everything that transpired, he more recently disclosed the reason why Princess Diana's casket was not opened. More will be spoken on that subject in the paragraphs that follow. The reality, on the other hand, was far more convoluted than the concept of their marriage, which had been evocative of a fairy tale. Within a short period of time Diana came to the realization that the pressures of royal life were too much for her to handle, and that the intense scrutiny from the public was a significant hardship for her. Diana was oblivious to the notion that her husband's heart was not entirely hers. During that period, while the couple was in the process of developing their marriage, the pressure that would eventually come to characterize a large part of their relationship also grew. Charles continued his relationship with Camilla despite the public vows he had made regarding his adultery. Diana was entirely dedicated to her obligations as a wife and mother, yet Charles continued his relationship with Camilla while Diana was married to him. Although Diana was initially unaware of the full extent of their connection, it was evident to those who were in their immediate vicinity that Charles and Camilla's bond remained particularly strong. This remained the case despite Diana being uninformed of both of their connections. After some time had passed, Diana would openly disclose how Charles' emotional connection to Camilla was a significant source of contention in their marriage. After Diana discovered that Camilla had been involved in her marriage, she experienced a significant degree of emotional distress. Camilla had been involved in Diana's marriage, something she had admitted to even before they were married. Diana had a sense that something wasn't quite right, which she was experiencing. It is highly possible that Diana's encounter with Camilla at a public event in 1981, just a few weeks after her wedding, was one of the most upsetting events she ever had in her life. Diana had the sensation that she was competing with a spiritual being, as Charles appeared to be completely at peace the moment Camilla entered the room. As a consequence, Diana had feelings of estrangement, miscommunication, and a deep sense of betrayal. Over the course of their relationship, Diana and Charles were subjected to persistent harassment by the media, which only served to exacerbate the enmity that had existed between them. Over the years, despite the fact that the birth of her children offered her a large degree of relief, Diana struggled privately with feelings of loneliness and betrayal due to the situations she found herself in. Although she was renowned all over the world as a compassionate mother and princess, her existence within the royal family was oppressive, leaving her with little room to express herself or fight against the system. Furthermore, she was not allowed to fight against the system. With the passage of time, Diana began to feel an increasing sense of isolation, and her impatience became more apparent. She relied heavily on her close friends and even members of her staff for support, leaning on them as a source of comfort during this difficult period. Diana's suspicions about Charles' infidelity were confirmed in 1992, a revelation that forced her to reach her breaking point. She discovered that Charles had resumed his relationship with Camilla while they were still married, and the betrayal was too much for her to bear. As Diana's mental health began to deteriorate and her struggles became more publicly scrutinized, the general public became increasingly aware of the difficulties she was facing. During her time in India in 1992, Diana confided in her friends and family about the challenges she was encountering in her personal life. The sincerity with which she expressed herself resonated deeply with the public, leading to an even greater appreciation for her. This moment also marked the beginning of her path toward independence, as she started carving out a profession for herself that was not defined by her role as Prince Charles' wife. Diana described this as the beginning of her journey, a turning point that led to her eventual quest for freedom. In 1992, Diana and Charles made a public declaration that they were no longer together. Despite continuing to carry out their royal duties independently, the damage to their relationship was irreparable. Diana came to the painful realization that she could no longer live in a situation where she felt emotionally abandoned and publicly humiliated, ultimately deciding to separate from her spouse. As a result of this realization, this choice was not just based on personal considerations. The decision she made to leave Charles, despite the fact that it was difficult, ultimately resulted in her gaining freedom. In addition to this, she devoted her time and energy to charitable work and the parenting of her children. She focused on rebuilding herself outside of the royal family world. In spite of the passage of time, the death of Princess Diana on August 31, 1997, continues to be known as one of the most shocking and heartbreaking events in the history of modern times. Even at this late hour, the pain caused by her demise continues to linger. Charles has openly stated that he feels some degree of guilt for it, something that he has been quite open about. Not too long ago, he revealed the truth regarding the events that transpired in relation to her funeral. The death of Princess Diana, which occurred in a car accident in Paris, devastated the fundamental foundations of the world. Her untimely passing, which took place not long after she had been referred to as the People's Princess, sparked emotions and generated questions from people all around the world. Diana was a phenomenon known worldwide due to her elegance, beauty, and outgoing nature. She was unlike any other princess that had ever existed before. On the other hand, despite the fact that she was adored by the general public, her life was anything but a typical fairy tale. This was a result of the load of royal expectations, which was aggravated by the difficulties she suffered in her marriage to Charles. She experienced a tremendous degree of strain on both her mental health and her personal life. This strain was significant enough to be considered excessive. In the years leading up to her death, Diana's life had already been characterized by a number of situations that were brought to the public's attention. Her marriage to Charles had been in a state of disarray for a major chunk of the time they had been together, and the situation had been made much more difficult by the fact that both partners had been unfaithful. It is common knowledge that Charles reacted to the subject of whether or not Camilla Parker Bowles played a role in the breakdown of his marriage by saying, "Well, there were three of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." He was responding to the question of whether or not Camilla took part in the dissolution of his marriage. The media, which had previously revered Diana, began to adopt a more critical tone toward her after the dissolution of her marriage to Charles in 1996. This shift in perspective occurred after Diana's marriage to Charles had been officially dissolved. Nevertheless, despite the transformation in the media's portrayal, Diana continued to maintain a unique position in the hearts of the general public. In the years that followed, she kept herself actively engaged in humanitarian initiatives and topics that were beneficial to humanity, remaining committed to causes. Even though the media had been invasive throughout her entire life, it was the paparazzi, however, who were ultimately responsible for a significant portion of the tragedy that unfolded on that dreadful night in Paris. Over the course of several years, the paparazzi had relentlessly trailed Diana, snapping images of her every step in order to satiate the public's insatiable desire for the most recent information surrounding the princess. On the evening of August 31, 1997, Diana was in Paris with her companion Dodi Fade. The couple, who had just returned from spending the night at the Ritz Hotel, intended to travel to a place where they could enjoy some peace and quiet. Photographers eager to snap another picture of Diana pursued their vehicle, turning what should have been a tranquil evening into a hectic scenario. The photographers took a forceful and unyielding approach that evening, and as soon as Diana's automobile left the Ritz Hotel, photographers on motorcycles remained close behind, shooting at high speeds as they raced through the streets of Paris. The pursuit was fraught with danger, and it didn't take long before one of the unfavorable outcomes occurred. Henry Paul, who was also the head of security at the hotel, was driving at a fast rate of speed across the city in an effort to avoid being seen by the photographers. He was also the chauffeur for Diana. Despite his efforts, Paul was unable to keep control of the vehicle as it entered the Pont de El Alma tunnel, and the vehicle collided with one of the concrete pillars. The intensity of the impact was so significant that both Diana and Dodi Fayed sustained major injuries as a result of the crash. Both were taken to the hospital in critical condition following the accident, but Dodi did not survive the collision. During that time, people around the world remained unaware of just how terrible the situation had truly become. There was a rapid spread of news over the globe within a few moments of the accident, with media outlets from all over the world reporting on the event. One thing became quite obvious. Despite the fact that there were some early inaccuracies, Princess Diana, the woman who had been in the public eye for such a substantial amount of time, was fighting for her life. Shockwaves spread across the globe as people from all walks of life mourned the passing of a woman who had left an indelible mark on the world through her beauty, compassion, and kindness. Millions expressed their sorrow over her untimely death, with countless individuals watching the funeral held on September 6, 1997. This event became one of the most viewed in global history, uniting people in a shared moment of grief. The funeral of the beloved Princess of Wales was not merely a royal event, it symbolized both personal and collective mourning. People from diverse backgrounds came together to pay their respects and bid a final farewell to Diana, a true icon of empathy and generosity. Through her exceptional ability to connect with ordinary people, she had won hearts worldwide. Diana's life stood as a powerful representation of compassion and selflessness, and her tragic death in Paris left the world in a state of profound shock. The circumstances surrounding Diana's death intensified feelings of loss and injustice. The catastrophic crash in Paris triggered grief, anger, and disbelief among those left behind. People around the world united in sorrow, reflecting on the impact of a woman who had influenced so many lives. Her funeral was a deeply significant moment that transcended cultural and national boundaries, bringing together mourners from every corner of the world. In London, hundreds of people gathered even before Diana's passing to pay tribute. Outside Kensington Palace, where she had spent much of her life, the streets were lined with flowers, heartfelt messages, and tokens of remembrance. Many of these mourners had never met her, but were profoundly moved by her work, her genuine empathy, and her influence. The funeral service at Westminster Abbey was conducted with great care and dedication. A palpable sense of collective sorrow filled the air as members of the royal family, led by Queen Elizabeth, and Diana's immediate family, including Prince Charles and her sons, William and Harry, attended. Diana's casket was draped in the royal standard, and she was laid to rest among other family members. The passing of Princess Diana had a far-reaching impact, touching not only the people of the United Kingdom, but also celebrities and prominent figures worldwide. One of the most emotional tributes came from Elton John, a close friend of Diana's, who expressed his grief through a musical homage. Known for his deep connection with Diana, Elton performed a reworked version of his song Candle in the Wind, transforming it into a heartfelt tribute to her life and legacy. The revised lyrics celebrated Diana's compassion, her humanitarian efforts, and her ability to inspire millions. Diana's tragic death left many unanswered questions, and her funeral became a focal point of remembrance. A long-standing narrative suggested that the decision to keep her casket closed was made to protect the privacy of her family, particularly her sons. However, recent revelations from King Charles have shed light on the true reasons behind this decision. At the age of 75, King Charles disclosed that Diana's body had suffered severe trauma in the crash, and the visible wounds made it too distressing for public viewing. The decision to keep the casket closed was made to shield William and Harry, both teenagers at the time, from additional emotional distress. It also aimed to spare the public the anguish of witnessing the aftermath of such a tragic event. This choice underscored the royal family's concern for the mental well-being of Diana's sons and their desire to protect the public from an unbearable sight. Ultimately, the decision to keep the casket closed was an act of compassion and love. It reflected the royal family's commitment to shielding Diana's children and the global community from further pain, emphasizing the importance of privacy and dignity in the face of unimaginable loss. Despite the years that have passed, Diana's memory endures as a symbol of grace, humanity, and resilience.